Everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of Dinger Dudes. We are honored to have former MLB player, the Chief Operating Officer of RoadRunnerCBD, and the voice behind the podcast, Corner of the Clubhouse, Kyle Blanks. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us on our podcast. How's your summer going?
It is nice and warm, but it's going well. How about yourself?
We're doing perfect, man. We are absolutely honored that you took time out of your day to be with us. We have some great questions to ask you. Hopefully, we can get some good conversation, some good insight. We should have a great time.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, if you're ready to get started, I can go ahead and ask my first question.
Fire away.
All right. So, I read in your article titled Feel and Function, and you mentioned the word feel as being the connection you have with your routine, and that certain adjustments you make have either a positive or a negative effect on what becomes your said feel. So, I understand that each player has their own feel and that no two players require the same adjustments. So, I want to ask, what was the most important adjustment that you had to make mentally to help you get through season after season?
Um, I'd say like just the fact that there's constant mental adjustments, rarely, or let's say you are almost always physically capable of what you're trying to accomplish. And that's ultimately what I learned through a lot of failure, a lot of injury, just that you're physically able to do a lot of this. It's telling your body what to do and how to do it, and ultimately also understanding that the person on the other side of who of the competition isn't trying to allow you to do what you want to do. So you have to kind of come to grips with all of that. And everyone does it in their own way. Everyone fights the current their own way. Even the best guys fail 70% of the time, and that's something that i I tend to gain more perspective from looking at my failures than simply looking at my successes. There's not as much to build on when you have the success, the accomplishment of success, as much as when you can see how a different approach probably could have gotten you a little bit closer.
Absolutely, absolutely. And is there like maybe a certain routine that like you personally had that maybe help you prepare for a game to kind of help you get into like the right mental mindset before you step that on the field?
Yeah, I think I had a pretty I guess diverse routine that I'd say I use it. It helped me kind of be like a metronome to how I felt. So once I would get through that routine, I was open to, if I felt something was missing, I can go ask a question and see like, well, what can I do for this? What adjustment can I make to this? There's you can kind of make any adjustment you want, and you still have to try it out. Even if it's successful, especially in baseball, you're almost certainly going to have to make another adjustment for yourself because the game is adjusting to you. And you'll see that a lot in guys that have great first years, and that's the only years they have.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you for that insight. And I guess I can go ahead and go away with my second and final question of the day. And it's so you explain again that self-awareness is invaluable to the cultivation and development of the work field. But you also talk about how you find success through consistently overcoming failure, which you kind of just touched on. But whenever you went through a slump or maybe a time where there was a struggle at the plate, I guess what did you have to be self-aware about to overcome that failure and find that success?
Each instance is going to be a little different. Once again, I'd say the common theme is you're physically fine, right? You're actually you're very, very capable of getting this going. But once again, you are being competed against, so you have to keep that in mind, as well as the disruption in your timing, in how you feel physically, whatever that is something. It would be like if you're playing video games and you understand there's a degree of lag, or there's a degree of nuance to whatever activity you're doing. That's the same thing you have to be able to feel out with the game. And unfortunately, one at bat to the next is not always a fun way of doing that. That's why at the highest levels, it's how can you do that pitch to pitch? You have to be able to make those adjustments in game. And once again, at my best, even when I can look back at times where I feel like I wasn't failing at all, there is a very, very large volume of failure. It just feels different when you're, let's say, accomplishing what you're trying to more consistently, because that's not necessarily about what you recover. It's not necessarily about the outcome of your statistics so much as how did it feel to do that. Like I've had strikeouts that felt way better than hits, and that's basically because not all hits feel great, especially when I have to go do it again. And you know, I'd rather feel good or focus on feeling good than focus on just getting an outcome statistically. Because if I do put that focus in the wrong place for too long, it will expose the problem. And that's where you see guys just kind of, you can't get by on a season that is just not up to snuff, and the games become pretty subjective. Like some guys will hit a hard 240, some guys will hit a soft 280. So I mean, I'm a little more objective in that regard, where like I can look at my successes or failures as deconstructively as possible, where it's my goal was never to break a bat and get a hit, but you kind of have to take what you get. And I now would tell you, focus on the adjustment you can make for the next time. That's ultimately all. You can't change whatever happened, so you have to put that energy and, I guess, data and feedback that you just gained from what you did into a new approach the next time. Sometimes you can do it pitch to pitch, sometimes it's game to game, sometimes it's at bat to at bat.
And I always hear all the time that like it's a mental game, and I love how you keep bringing up that everyone is physically able to do it. It's just those mental aspects and mental adjustments that you have to make, to make that certain approach to get through a slump or a failure. But I did actually have one more question that I'd like to ask you. And so this previous week, our own Jackson Volts here on the interview with us, and then Stephen Lambert, who's not with us, had the opportunity to interview current player Eric Osberg, and he really dove deep into the dark side of the MLB business and mentioned that in the minor leagues, it's all about draft capital, and if you don't really have high capital, it seems like you're not. It seems like you are constantly overlooked, no matter how good you truly are at performing at the plate. And I know on your podcast, Corner of the Clubhouse, I was able to listen a little bit of it, and you also discussed the dark side of the MLB business. But do you agree that the minor league system is poorly set up and maybe offers a lot of disadvantages to some really talented players in the system?
um yes, but in a way that if you're good enough, ultimately, for the most part, you know you'll get as high as you can get. And that's not to say people don't slip through it. I was never the most talented. I was never the best. I had consistencies different than other people. And I think that's, I was a draft and follow. I was a 42nd round pick. I signed for $140,000. So, I mean, some guy who didn't sign for anything would look at me as someone who has a lot of draft stock. And I've seen guys that have been paid millions of dollars be thrown away for poor performance. So it does work like that, but it also isn't necessarily aimed at one particular individual like that. Like I never felt like the game owes you nothing. So immediately I would tell anybody the game owes you nothing. So as someone from a very, very small town in New Mexico, I don't know what the argument is all the time. I'm a representation of not the most exposure and actually getting to a place I never would have expected. How many guys are overlooked in the middle of a hotbed like a Florida, a Texas, a Georgia? That's just, it's the nature of the beast. It's the way it goes. Some very, very talented guys never even get the opportunity. Sometimes that's not even about their baseball talent. It's about their other problems. So, I mean, I have played with some of the most talented guys you'd never, ever know of for many different reasons. And I think that's something I would always harp back to, is the most incredible talents and tools you'll ever see. You'd almost never see at the major league level, because they're so inconsistent. They don't make it that far.
Right. And, as we've had the opportunity to interview some other players, it's always amazing to get their unique perspective on different situations and topic like this. So I really appreciate you giving your insight and your kind of side of like the story you can tell and the things you know about the minor leagues and situations like that. So I really appreciate it. And that's all I have for my questions. So I'll actually pass it on to Jackson. He has some questions he's going to ask you.
Awesome.
Hey Kyle, again, thank you so much for the conversation we had a couple of days ago and taking time to join this interview. Now, I know you have your own company. I know the reason why you started the company. Can you give a little insight on that, how you started it for the viewers?
So when I was finished playing in 2017, I basically would tell anyone who would ask, I'm going to get my medical cannabis card. I was living in Arizona at the time, and I just want to see how I feel. At the end of every season, I would always basically detox from everything. You stop taking all the anti-inflammatories. You just kind of see how your body feels, try and recover to go at it again. And this time I knew if I'm not being offered something substantial enough, I'm just going to, I'm done. I'm fine with that. And so once I got released, I think in like June, and basically by about September, I was pretty aware that if I'm not getting a big offer from relative to what I consider big, I'm done. I don't feel good enough to keep going, but I feel good enough to do something else. And so just initially did a lot of work at trying to get into baseball as a rehab coach. I'll actually send you guys that document just so you can take a look at it, see what you think. But I wanted to basically help guys in the rehab situation that I was always in, just from the player perspective, because I knew I could help. I understand what the trainer's dealing with. I understand what the PTs are dealing with. I understand what the players dealing with, strength coaches. So just trying to be somewhat of an intermediate to all that. And that I still am working on trying to bridge that, but the game is built the way it's built. So I actually met my partners through my brother. It's my brother's friend's parents, and we shared a very strong mutual interest of cannabis. And um, I was very fond of just topical treatments, just things the things you rub on, and they give you a degree of relief if they work for you. And I found a lot of things in cannabis that were working for me. And so we in 2018 had the opportunity to start a company together, and that was where that initially started. And since then, we've, our business is vitamins and supplements. It's also cannabis, but ultimately, my first question to anybody is, how do you feel? What are you dealing with? It's how can we just address what the symptom of how you feel is today, in favor of, like, I don't really care what you do, whether you're a baseball player or not. Feeling as good as you can is basically the best place you can start to, doing anything well. So that's kind of where, fast forward to now, I've had a lot of experience and a lot of really good experiences helping guys that are still playing the game at all different levels, trainers, managers, players still. And a lot of it's just based. I would love to have anybody avoid what I dealt with physically, but if you have the choice of playing today, I can't do anything other than help you armor yourself for whatever activity you're going to deal with today. And that doesn't mean you have to play a sport. It just means you have to wake up today and be human, because everybody's going to be on their feet. Everybody's going to deal with something, mental, physical, emotional. And that's ultimately where I've gotten to. Is just, I've had a ton of great help with that through baseball, because I was always in a rehab situation. So my physical therapists, my trainers were always great therapy outside of just the physical recovery, because we were basically kind of tied at the hip. So, in San Diego, we used to go, he'd come over and watch movies at my apartment. We'd go eat burgers at places, things that I'd bring in breakfast in the morning, things that just genuinely created a way more like feasible bonded culture. We're all here dealing with the same. It's early for everybody. everybody likes sweet food in the morning, so let's just dive into this and do what we can. So, even as a player, my last year in Texas, I used to there was a nutritionist there who didn't was kind of pushy with food, and I never really talked with her, but I was always used to having donuts on day games, and so I got there for the first day game I was playing, and I'm like, where the donuts? Like, this isn't hard to do. And so I found a couple in the clubby's office, and I asked them, and they're like, well, these are ours because she doesn't let anybody do this. So I started bringing in, I'll send you guys the picture. I started bringing in basically like hundreds of donuts, like about $100 worth of donuts every day game, because
Nice.
nobody's in a great mood. I'm a very early morning person, but nobody is in a great mood in the morning. And when there's donuts, everybody seems to be in a slightly better mood. And that was something, whether you're on the road, you're at home, it was something over the years I understood the value of. So anytime I could do something like that, like the money it cost me is irrelevant to how much more cohesive the clubhouse will be today. That's the type of stuff I now get to do with people that are just the general person dealing with whatever. And my best, my best attempt at helping you starts with, how do you feel? What are you trying to accomplish today? And that's kind of ultimately what I would love to help with in baseball when I can, but it's typically been reserved to conversations like this. That's why I told you guys it'd probably be a little bit different perspective than you're commonly going to hear.
Now, I know you did mention rehab and injury, and I know you mentioned in your Feel and Function article that you mentioned lackluster adjustments. What adjustments when facing injury would you give to young ball players no matter what level they play on?
Um, the adjustments you need to make are going to be more of like filtering in information, like there's not I wouldn't tell you to try every single drill, but if something doesn't quite make sense to you, don't necessarily listen to the justification of it, right? Like, why do you want me to do this? One of when I was in AAA in Texas, one of my hitting coach at the time, I'm blanking on his name, I'll pull it up, but it was amazing how a little bit of contention of like, just tell me what you're trying to get me to do, because I'm trying to tell my body what to do. I don't want to fail. I know you don't want me to fail. And I think that's part of, like, you've got to, I guess my best advice would be, someone who's trying to help you and you genuinely believe they're trying to help you, you can't mistake their attempt at help for trying to help make you fail. You know what I mean? Like, they don't know the solution. You don't know the solution. So you have to actually be willing to try things that are without question going to be uncomfortable, but you've got to be willing to make adjustments. Like, those are the lackluster adjustments are basically allowing the game to change around you. You know what I mean? There's a lot of guys I played with that weren't able to adjust to the pitch. It's just, he's doing the same thing to you and you can't make an adjustment. And I'm the person who's going to always remind you get to fail 7 out of 10 times. So if you can't do this with that many attempts on your side, and once again, this is a reflective perspective. Like, if you're a professional, you should be able to hear this. You should be able to understand that you get to fail 7 out of 10 times. That's the beauty of baseball. But if you don't do something valuable with that chunk of failure, if you're not cultivating data by trying different things, sometimes, like, when I felt really good, it really didn't matter if I had 2 strikes on me, because I was comfortable enough. I could actually work the count. I could actually do things that give you flexibility in the moment, but ultimately I'm still going to fail 7 out of 10 times. So how good an at bat feels is not necessarily going to be a reflection of how well you're doing statistically. So I would always tell any players to focus on what you can improve. Like, what are the things you can improve, as opposed to, I'd rather you take a better swing than get a hit. But I also understand the nature of, if you're hitting a certain average, you'd much rather have a hit than have a good swing. Like that is just by nature part of the game. So you've got to be able to communicate some of these things. You've got to be able to understand this. The game is not static. The game will adjust to you, but it's in a way that there's so much data around what you're doing. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be able to, and like the game I came from to the game nowadays, you've got to be able to cultivate more success from your strikeouts, right? Like if you're striking out a lot in general, that's the only statistic you can actually, if you were to remove those strikeouts, remove those at bats, that's the only thing you can actually kind of cultivate more success from. So if you're being given this leash, once again, whether I was never given that leash, whether I had it or not, I never felt like I could strike out a lot. So a lot of my minor league seasons don't have a high rate of strikeouts tied to them. So that took a lot of work to do that. And that's because I was taught to do that. And it's not, and there's still guys that accomplish it. The best hitters will always out hit a philosophy, but you've got to be willing to, if you're not that person, which I was never that person, you could watch any of my films. Every year I stand differently. Every year I swing a little differently. I never had the consistency of some guys that genuinely look exactly the same from day one till the last day they swing. So you've got to be willing to make adjustments because there's only a couple guys on earth that actually have like an insignia on a shoe or on a shirt or something. And that degree of consistency is impressive to me, but look at the failure. Like there's not way more success. There's more consistency in the success. Like they still fail at the same rate. And that's something I would tell anybody at the highest level. Like I said, you're all capable of doing this. The difference of what separates us is the consistency. Like I'm a 240 hitter. The difference of a Hall of Fame average to mine is 6 hits out of 100. It's not as impressive in a set of 100. It's very impressive over sets of thousands. And that's the difference of what I've learned for what I experienced to why I, I wouldn't say I'm a great, I'm not a coach, but I wouldn't claim to be a great one for anybody because I don't really care to look at the shiny side of it. I'd rather you learn from more of what you're going to see, which is the failure. Like the game will turn on you as soon as you think you have it mastered. And that's the part of it that's just the karma part I feel of it that I really try not to incur the wrath of.
Wow.
Chase, what were you gonna say?
I was just saying, wow. I know, I wasn't saying that. Y'all can go ahead.
Uh, so for my final question, I know, as you said, you started your CBD company after you retired. Can you provide an overview of how drug policies in baseball have evolved over the years, maybe since you started playing pro ball, and how are they viewed in today's game?
So I can give you a little bit of breakdown through when I played now and a little bit of what I understand now, but I just don't have the current policy in front of me. So when I started playing in the minors, it was in '05, which was immediately after all of the steroid things, all of the Mitchell report stuff. So I would categorize my generation of players as like you're basically you're not necessarily going to be able to get away with anything generation. Like you're the example generation of guys that I would imagine statistically there a lot of what's talked about across '05 to 15 is a difference in homers to the prior 10 years, difference in just how guys look, all those things. But that was a big part of like the policy, in the minors and it's really not very forgiving. You're walking in, you basically have to pee, you're basically naked and someone's watching you pee. And as someone who went through it, I never had any inclinations to cheat the system. Even in the big leagues when I was consuming cannabis, it was under a drug of abuse umbrella as opposed to a performance enhancing or another another area of actual classification. So in the minor leagues, you're basically reserved to what's over the counter. And theoretically, I think if there is a level of caffeine that you can test something, something for it. It's a high level. But if you have, other than having a therapeutic use exemption, if you have Adderall, if you have something else that is just a positive against the drug policy, you're basically reserved to drinking, taking whatever pills or things you're aware of that can that are just not illegal to that. So most guys drink. And from my level of awareness, I was never like an illicit drug user. So I couldn't tell you what it's like to go do the other stuff. I never did coke. I never went out and did anything like that. So I can't really speculate on what that looks like exactly. So, once I got to the big leagues, it was, I was concerned with cannabis, and it wasn't even immediately. So I was called up in 2009. I didn't start smoking until really like 2012. So for me, it was more of like, I couldn't really tell you what the purpose of the drug policy was until I started using it, because I really didn't have any. I was using the things I was given from my trainers and protein. So I never really looked into trying to take anything other than what I could just go get. So when I first started in the big leagues, all of the medicine was in-house. It was behind locked cabinets, but it was basically, so if you had an issue immediately after a game, you didn't have to go to a pharmacy. If it was too late, you had access to certain things you'd need. Over the years, I don't think it was a baseball issue, but another sport, there was a big issue with that setup. So after that, it became it's all prescriptions that have to be picked up, or they can be delivered, something like that. And even those are mostly for what I was used to. Surgeries, obviously there was opiates, but traditionally every year I was taking some type of pretty heavy anti-inflammatory for the entire season, typically sometime in spring training, just after you break that seal and you need something else. So let's say 2012, once I started smoking, I would routinely smoke, go to the field that day. There's a drug test. Without understanding the nuance of how it works, I definitely am not getting in trouble today. Not concerned with it. And that's, I think at Jackson, I told you, that's the same umbrella. Consuming cannabis was the same umbrella that Tyler Skaggs consumed opiates on. And most guys, I was even saying, most guys have a prescription. If you've played long enough, you've had a surgery, you'll have some type of overflow of material just because you have it. I still have pills that I just keep as more of something I have so many bottles of pills that this is just what I used to have. And so the policy is really interesting in that, because until I really learned what the issue was, because in the minor leagues, if you were caught with cannabis, there's a 3-strike thing where you could be and you're, I think, kicked out for life, or you're definitely gone for a while. But initially it was treated like you're a drug addict. You had to do a lot of things that I would not be okay with for knowing what I know now. And granted, I know it's a different time, but it's more of the business trying to control the workers within the business. The owners aren't drug tested. So what are you taking that I can't take? And you're not doing the same thing you're asking me to do. So there's a lot of that involved in it. But, when I left the game, so let's go 2012, 13, after 2014, I was taken off the roster with Oakland, and immediately just no more smoking. Just stopped it and immediately goes right back to drinking. So then in 2015, drinking, I get back up to Texas. It's just back to smoking then. Then after that season, basically for the next 2 years until I got released, it was just drinking. And that was all based around, I need to have a job. I can't, I can't break this rule, because I need to be able to earn, I need to be able to earn money. So I was never someone who really gambled on that. I was more someone who would tell you, like, I used alcohol as a tool, and it's just a very, very dull tool to use. But it was all based around drug policy. And I'm not someone who really, I'd still have to look at it to gain a sharper understanding of it. But if you're someone who has a problem of any kind, you could absolutely, I'll ask any of you, if your favorite player or the best player in the game currently had the worst problem imaginable, are they going to be benched today if they're still playing well? Is anyone going to stop this if they don't have to? And I've just learned from seeing some of that and going through it myself, like, no one's really going to. It's the guys like myself, the guys that are somewhat on the bubble, who are a little more expendable. There's a lot of guys who have been taken off the roster, drug tested, now you're positive. It's once again, the system's built very, very poorly. It doesn't account for how it works on its feet day to day. It's it's written by people who aren't doing it, and that's somewhat of what makes it difficult to, I guess, keep up with it after a time, because I think it was after 2020, now there's no testing for THC, CBD, any of those things, which I've learned because on my side, trying to advocate for some alternative to just what has only been in the clubhouse. I just know that when you create access, it doesn't create an open bridge for people to change. It really does take a ton of education. A lot of people are, they don't want to lose what they have, and unfortunately that creates sometimes it creates unreasonable expectations of things, and it creates the stigma of cannabis is still fairly common. You guys are from the part of the country you're from. I'm sure you're aware of the whole spectrum of it, so I just am very open about that stuff, talking with people, because if you have a hard drug problem.
I actually did have a continuing question to that last one. If you were, how do you foresee drug policies evolving in baseball over the next decade if you were to create one for the MLB?
I don't know about me creating anything, but ultimately, if you it should be about, unfortunately there's a money component. So I didn't want to mess my body up, so there's certain things I was not willing to take, and that was based on education and learning, and then also seeing examples of what happens when you take certain things. And so I personally just advocate for, you've got to educate people on what these things do, because I had access to a lot of things that I didn't try because I was more afraid of like the worst possible scenario. So the drug policy needs to be, it either needs to be like extremely rigid or extremely flexible. You either gotta treat everybody exactly the same, or you have to make it so open everybody gets to do what they want. And for large periods of time, I mean, amphetamines are pretty common. There's a lot of things throughout time that are pretty common in the game. And in every one of those instances, you have a guy who wasn't on steroids out competing guys on steroids. You have a guy not using greenies out competing guys on greenies. I was out competed and definitely out competed guys taking things I wasn't willing to take. But that's kind of the nature of, like, the game is somewhat of an equalizer in and of itself, because for all these things people have been able to take for however long, seems like the best we can always kind of muster up hitting's 300. Seems like those ERAs always seem to be at a general average of what they are. The superstars have the really, really good ones, and the general averages are kind of the general averages. So, I admittedly, when I was done playing, I thought, I'm like, all right, I'm going to get a bunch of steroids and HGH so I can get huge and, repair some of my my ligaments, tendons. And ultimately, after gaining a lot more knowledge on what all comes with that, I didn't do any of it. I didn't really see a value in doing something that I'm creating another potential problem. Every input is going to create an outcome you have to kind of manage and deal with. And that's somewhat of the issue when some guys, my adjustment was going in the cage and trying to figure it out. Some guys are going to use a pill. Some guys are going to use a needle. There's no real one solution to another. in the eyes of the player. Guys just want to do better, and not everybody is going to not everybody's going to see the same adjustments for the same value. That's why for all the recovery I went through, for all the surgeries, I never really thought about using something that would get me in trouble, because it was like, I have all these other resources that I haven't even tried yet. Like, what's the use of asking for the shortcut if you've never driven the way I told you to go? So that's somewhat of how, like, it's kind of like with the hitting, like I was saying, like, if you haven't done it and it doesn't sound like it makes sense, ask questions, try it, and see how much sense it makes after that. Because through that process, you might find out you don't need to do this, you shouldn't do this, but you also might find out that you need it, or that it was beneficial that you tried it. So but as far as like drugs and substance, that is more of an education. I mean, how much education does well, let's say this, I know guys get a lot of good education on diet, sleep, all these things, and it's still some of the biggest issues they have dealing with players. Like, one of my last spring trainings, we had a sleep specialist come in and tell us that, like, LeBron James gets 12 hours of sleep a day or some bullshit. Like, who the can you have to be ridiculously rich to have an opportunity at that, and no one to say about it. So, like, reasonably speaking, it was, it's always about taking this information and trying to apply it the best you can. Because at your guys' age up to your 30s, whatever, I can't tell you not to go out tonight. I can tell you what is on the other side of it, but you're also young enough to mitigate the bad side of it. Like, I have numerous days as a rookie where I was in there early just chugging Powerade and trying to sweat and do it, because you're able to do it. I can go play today. So for me, it's like a lot of, and there's guys that drink while they play. There's guys that come off the field and smoke cigarettes. There's guys that, there is not one particular thing that this game requires to be good. That's part of why I think it is more about educating everybody on, look, this is what it's going to possibly do, this is the possible benefit, but realistically, are you getting enough sleep right now? Are you eating as well as you can? Or are you eating half as well as you can? What adjustments aren't you trying in favor of a shortcut you're trying to get?
And that's why the dedicated players who don't do these substances and who take these routines, that is why they succeed. And again, this is a great perspective that a lot of some young ball players don't seem to take seriously. And I appreciate you for this perspective and answering my questions. But I'm going to pass it on to our final member, Andrew Jefferson.
And yeah, I mean, I just want to go back to what you said a couple minutes ago, how you were talking about, I guess, the two sides of the story when it comes to what players take to make their bodies feel better, and how there's upper hand guys that, are able to take things that the guys doing the actual job, are not able to take. And that just causes a lot of controversy. And along with that, and just your, I guess, motive to like help players get to the feeling comfortable in their own body so they can succeed on the field. Aside from those things, is there anything else that motivated you and your passion for helping, I guess, other people find their optimal wellness, particularly through products like CBD?
Just knowing, like, that's how I was helping rehab. Like, it was directly applied to baseball. So I would take, let's say, the scenario, trying to figure out how my elbow feels. It's not hard if you're working with the right person, as long as they're asking and inquiring, as well as you have to be able to articulate what you're dealing with. So if somebody comes in the store, my first inclination isn't to tell them that you're doing this wrong. It's, how are you feeling and what are you doing? Let's see where we can start. Like, yeah, are you tired? Well, did you sleep too much? Did you not sleep enough? Where are you in what you're doing? Because that was it was something I read a lot of things to myself just as reminders. And one thing I wrote to myself is, baseball taught me to have no expectations of how to feel today, every day. And that's part of, like, I have no expectations of feeling perfect today. So I'm going to be more open to just seeing how I feel today. And that became more of how I approached it as I got more injuries, recovered more, because I had to be more open-minded. I had to think more down the field, right? Like I have an analogy of like, throwing passes to yourself down the field. If rehab is a very big pass that you're throwing, you've got to be able to put your head down and run for a while to get up to, to get that, make up that distance to actually catch the ball. And it's not necessarily about catching the ball so much as being in the area and having the opportunity to catch it, because you're once again, you're going to get to a place where you have to find a new normal. You have to find, how can I continue to improve? Because, every surgery is going to repair something, but it's not the same way you went in. So how can you get back? Some guys are really good at it. Some guys, I found a way to naturalize it pretty, like surgery doesn't bother me, because if I have the rehab, I understand that I'm going to be back to, a degree of optimal performance. I just have to find what that is. Like, the same way I've seen a lot of guys walk into a clubhouse and say they feel great today and do terribly. At the same way, I've had that feeling walking into a clubhouse. I feel like $1 million today, and that doesn't necessarily mean I can't go 0 for 4 with 4. And I've had that happen numerous times. It's why I'm far more, I try and cultivate the humility side of education in baseball than the, like, I'm not going to blow up your ego. It's that there's too few times, if out of 10 times I'm overly cheering you on to the 7 you're getting out, it's just not worth it. Like, let's learn, how can we see what we can pull out of that 7 to make those other 3 worth it. We can do this every 3 out of 10 times. The difference of, when I was, let's say, more locked in physically, mentally, emotionally, all that stuff, my 0 for 20s were more like 0 for 12s, 0 for 10s. You find more consistent success through just different failure. That's ultimately what I'd say is, like, you've just got to be able to adapt and kind of make adjustments that you've just never had to make, because you haven't had to play today. Even if you played tomorrow, you've never played this game today.
And that's just a really cool perspective. And another big thing that caught my eye when it comes to this interview, because this is just a perspective about the game of baseball that the typical fan like us three, we don't get to see. We don't get to perceive it like you did, because it's more so things that happen off the field that translate your success on the field. And I kind of gathered all this for myself when you gave us the opportunity to read some of the articles that you put together. Competition logic was one that I found most enjoyable, in how you discuss how adjustments in baseball can benefit individuals outside of competition. So how has your approach to continuous improvement in baseball influenced your life off the field, especially in your current role as at Roadrunner CBD?
So think of like what I said in that as, everybody right now in existence can be as good at the game of baseball as they can respectively. Where that falls on a graph of free agency is up to whoever, how they feel about it. Like, I know you can be as good as you can be. It's irrelevant how that measures up to somebody else, because you're not them, they're not you. You're playing with different decks, so why would you compare them? So the same way you can look at, the same way any person who walks in the store and is looking for some degree of help, or like, I just look at myself as more of a soundboard. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? How can I be somewhat of just a back and forth for you? So just not having a presumption of what's needed, I think, is more what I try and do. I know you need something. I just don't know what it is. And the bigger thing is, if you're not honest with me, let's say I ask you how you're feeling and you say something that is not accurate. Well, what are we working on? That's ultimately where, like, we're not going to be working on the problem. We're going to be working on something else that you told me that won't get you somewhere else that it could get you. So, trying to focus on, I don't care how you think someone else feels. How do you feel? How can we get you feeling? Because if you feel better, like, I tell anybody, if your world gets better, my world gets better. If you have a great day today, whether I ever come into contact with you, I know there was really no chance of getting any negativity from you. That's that's what I try and encourage. Like on the field, that's far more difficult because the other team isn't trying to allow that to happen. That's why you have to focus on what can be improved. I have had an at bat where I took a check swing and popped the ball up 10 feet, broke my bat, got called out, and to the next game where it was basically like, I'm now going on a tear and I'll be back in the big leagues. Those things are, you are always one swing away. And unfortunately, when you're in the middle of, let's say, not the ideal situation, it is very difficult to feel that. And like, once again, you're always physically capable, which is probably the more like thorn in your side, because you almost start trying too hard. You start putting more physicality into the action than is actually necessary. And when you're tense, you're not going to be the same player as when you're loose. So, trying to now, whether you're a baseball player or any other human waking up and doing what you have to do today, those are objective principles that apply to everybody. That's why I encourage people to how good can you feel? It doesn't matter what that person's saying, because unless they're being genuinely honest, you can't confirm that's how they feel. They can tell you whatever they want to tell you, but that's exactly why there are instances of someone telling someone how they feel, and then it comes out that is not how that was happening, or that's why I've learned, for what baseball taught me, just being able to be honest in that capacity is so useful, because the problem isn't getting fixed if you're not working on it. I went into the cage and not worked on the problem a lot. And until someone is able to get through to me about what I'm working on as opposed to the problem I need to fix, that's why I've become very solution oriented. I don't care why you're here so much as the fact that from here to where we can get to is what I think we should focus on. You are where you are right now. Like, what can we do to change where you are? The only way we can do that is working on the time that hasn't ticked yet, as opposed to the time that's already passed.
Well, I really like that closing quote you use. It's a very interesting way to look at things, just to know that no matter where you are, in a situation, there can always be a solution if you're willing to detect that solution and work toward, or detect the problem and work towards that solution as appropriately as you can. But that was just an awesome perspective. But Chase and Jackson, if y'all guys have any closing comments or questions, feel free, or even Kyle, if you have any closing remarks that you would like to make, please feel free to go right at it.
No, anything. Like I said, I really enjoy having these types of conversations. I just know, generally speaking, this isn't something that the mainstream, I guess, appreciates a lot now. But that's why, like I said, if you guys have more questions, if you guys have things like this aren't too difficult to do, if you guys actually just want, I'm as full of shit as anybody, but my insight, my opinion is genuinely one of anybody's, and that's why I like sharing it, because I had my experience. My stats are easy to pull apart and feel how you want to feel about them. I'm just trying to explain how did this happen? Like, that's more of, and some of it is, I'll tell you, I didn't make an adjustment I could have made, and that doesn't mean that would have gave me more success. I can tell you, I stayed out this time, but that doesn't mean that's why I hit a homer or this. I'm more about, this is what happened, this is what I did. Now, if you can take some of that experience and use it to, kind of build a possibility, right? Like, if I told you getting better sleep is better than doing everything you want to do, right? Like, staying out's great if you have a reason to, but it's objectively not going to be the best thing you can do. And that's coming from someone who made that decision a lot to not do the better thing for myself. And everybody has, that's a human problem. That's why I kind of more openly express that type of stuff, because whether you're 17, 18, or 80, we're all going to suffer from the same shit. And that's because we're all human. That's part of, everybody can feel their best today. Everybody's able to learn something today. Baseball's what taught me that. And I look at baseball as a very difficult teacher, because there's really no tricks to it. There's really no, like, you can have the best plan you want, but look how those go. They don't seem to go to plan, where like I had no expectations of fame and fortune or doing anything. I barely got to watch a lot of baseball, only having a couple channels as a kid. So really, I would tell anybody, if you can focus on, like, I was always focused on baseball. I was happy baseball got me to college. I was happy baseball allowed my mom to cover what my books cost. Things that, all of the rest of it is hard to explain to somebody who wants to be where I ended up. But I also have to tell you, like, I had to go to school. Baseball always felt like something that could be taken away from me, whether as a kid I was, like, that's what keeps you getting good grades. That's what keeps you. It's why I think when I told Jackson, I asked anybody as a question, did you have to carry your stuff as a kid? Did you get yelled at as a kid, or were you yelling in the car? How did the game interact with you in your life? Because I came from the middle of nowhere. The first fields I played on are dirt, and they're still there. Things like that there's guys that in this game that play with milk cartons for gloves. I've never even seen one. And I started with a little plastic glove, so the game itself is like, there's probably someone not playing baseballs, never played baseball, that could throw harder than anybody in the game right now. You just got to teach them. That's my perspective on a lot of this stuff. And it's more empowering to the possibility than I'm not the one to do it, but the fact is it's possible. So the formula is what we have to find. I don't know what the formula for your best day is, but what do you think we can do? That's, especially for playing a game, that's the one thing. Like, your foundational routine is only going to help you, like, kind of, you're at go at that point. Now it's, you're starting. Now, how do you feel? Now, what adjustments are you going to make? Now, how are you going to respond to how the game responds to you? And it's just kind of like its own living, breathing thing. Every inning, every pitch, it's always somewhat changing. And that's why, baseball, I'll have to dig through a quote, but it's like, baseball is a very, every game of baseball is like a very beautiful life you get to live, and a beautiful death you get to die. You have to be able to open the book and close the book like that, and then kind of process what happened and why. And even tomorrow, your goal is to duplicate your best swing, because you can never take the same swing twice. So same with pitchers. You're never throwing the same pitch twice. Your goal is to duplicate what you believe is the best pitch you can throw over and over. And that's kind of the difference I've learned in the game for myself. Same way as your goal is to duplicate the best day you have in general. The problem with that is everyone else is also trying to do that in different ways alongside you. And that's why, like, baseball is a very unique example of, when you have a team moving in a certain direction, it's pretty crazy to look at what you can actually accomplish through that.
And I know that when Jackson originally reached out to you to do this interview, and he shared a little bit about that phone call y'all had, you were very clear that this was going to be a different type of interview, and that's what intrigued me, because we've interviewed Justin Matheson, Eric Osberg, and they gave us great insight as well. But like what you were able to share with us today was like completely different, and completely different side of the game that we never even thought that players could experience. So just everything you shared and your insight today was absolutely beautiful to the game of baseball. We really do appreciate your time coming on and giving us that different viewpoint.
Thank
No,
you.
thank you guys for allowing me to share a perspective that's just, I think it needs to be out in space, because I played with a lot of guys who played with this perspective, helped me understand how I feel, like, develop this perspective, trainers, coaches, players, like everybody. That's part of what I love, getting the feedback of it, because it's not mine so much as a collection of, like, the best things I can tell you I was told. And I can share that too. It's like, this is what this person taught me. This is what this person taught me. I just sandwiched it all together. It's kind of like, I use an analogy of, like, do you like the food on your plate touching? You'd be shocked how amazing combinations can be made when you let your chocolate touch your peanut butter, kind of like that's ultimately how you should, kind of approach making adjustments, or, taking in perspective. And especially when if I will always, take the advice or take to heart someone I genuinely believe has my best interests in what they're saying. That doesn't mean it's going to actually lead to the best outcome, but I'm willing to, it's like I said, they don't have to help me get my swing back for me to understand that's what they're actually trying to do. And that's because I don't know what I'm going to need. And that's from working with a bunch of coaches. That's why I was so happy to work with some of the coaches I had, because they knew me inside and out. They could come to me, or I would just, it'd be like walking into the field one day and just look at them and like, man, we got to do this. Let's go. Like, I don't know what the it's literally it's like he's on a radio talking to me, and I'm controlling this big machine. That's the part. It's like, I need to fix this. I don't know what the and that's sometimes how I feel. Like, it's, you're trying to get your body to do something, and all of that great feedback around you sometimes is, if you filter it and put it in the right order and apply it the right way, which is not always easy, that's how you get some of these recipes to go together. And sometimes that is an extra 5 minutes of sleep. Sometimes it's actually 5 minutes less. There is really no one recipe, other than you've got to try these things to then understand. Like, I had a day game routine to get ready for a game. I had a 7 o'clock routine, and that's just the difference of, you've got to be able to be flexible and somewhat adjustable, or adaptable to the fact that not every game's at 7 o'clock. It's not in the same stadium. It's not the same everything. So.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap up here, and we should have this interview posted again. But Jackson, did you have any closing remarks before we close out?
No, not really. But Kyle, where can people watching this video find you? Socials,
Absolutely.
websites, where can they find you?
Well, I'd have to look at my Instagram. I am on Instagram. You can just search my name. It should find it. Go to RoadRunnerCBD.com. Check out everything. We try and be very accessible. If you have any questions, just send them to the website. If you're in Edgewood, New Mexico, stop at Verb Health Shop. But ultimately we're advocates for education. We really want you to understand what your resources are before you just kind of throw in the towel and just think, I need an easy button. A lot of it's just, what's your lifestyle? How can you help yourself? Because I don't do anything for anybody. I just, ideally, if I'm impactful, it's helping someone understand their options. And but yeah, go all those places. We're pretty accessible. Those writings on medium.com. You guys can share those with anybody. Like I said, I try and be very accessible when I can. And a lot of it's just having to run into guys like yourself who have a little bit different interest than the mainstream. So I appreciate you guys for kind of finding me and setting this up.
No, thank you. But
Absolutely.
that was honestly amazing. Well, Kyle, I hope we can somehow reconnect again in the future if you are available.
Absolutely.
Guys, make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube and follow us on Instagram. Kyle, thank you again.
No,
Thank
thank
you
you guys
so
for having me.
much.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was an honor. And you have a great day too.
Thank you. You guys too.